Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shipping Your First Video Game. My name is Liam Esler. I'm the Managing Director of Summerfall Studios, and I will be your moderator for the day. With me is our wonderful bunch of panelists. We have Alicia Stone, Jacob Leaney, and Kathy Smart, all of whom have shipped their first games over the last year. So I wanted to put this panel together because I think that sometimes the experience of shipping a video game and the reality, or the expectation we have of shipping a video game and the reality of shipping a video game are very different things. And stuff, it doesn't often get talked about, like what the gap between these two things is. These three wonderful people here have a very different set of experiences. And I think will give us some really interesting stories and some insight into, what that is like. So to start off with, let's do some introductions. Kathy, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yes, I'm Kathy Smart and I'm in Joy Ever After Studios in Adelaide. We shipped Frog's Princess, the world's first children's full-length, fully interactive, fully voiced children's interactive storybook. And it's accessible to blind and deaf children.
Awesome. Jacob?
Hey everyone, my name's Jacob Leaney. I'm primarily kind of a music artist under the name Monster Mansion, but I develop games for my music releases. And this year I shipped a game called Video World, which is a synth-pop Halloween musical set in a 90s video store. And it kind of came with music that was a little bit kind of retro. So that's kind of my, I guess, specialty and niche and really where I come from is this music video game crossover.
Oh yeah, and Alicia.
Hi, I'm Alicia. So I'm the creative director at a studio called Myriad Game Studio. We're based in Tassie and we're all part-time games makers as well. So we've just released our first game called Where the Snow Settles to each Steam and Xbox. We were working on that for about 5 years. So it's been a long journey and we've come to the end of it. So yeah, it's exciting times.
It is indeed. And like, what a journey shipping a video game fucking is. It's truly a miracle that anything actually comes out ever. So first, congratulations, all of you, on actually getting something out the door. That is such a humongous achievement. So the first question I have is, how did you prepare for your first games project that you were going to ship? Alicia, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So our little studio started off not as a studio. We started off as just a bunch of friends doing some game jams together. And then we decided we loved that whole process a lot. So we decided to take on the whole video game development and release process. So that involved a lot of expectation setting as a team. We did start part-time. So a lot of us are IT specialists with full-time jobs elsewhere. So thankfully, we could actually use that experience to sit down regularly and talk about expectations as a team together as well. So one of the first questions we asked each other at the start was, why are we doing this? What do we want to get out of it? And then we reassessed that at regular stages along our long 5-year timeline. So we definitely prepared in terms of just getting on a level playing ground with each other first. And then from there, it was a question of what can we do? What can't we do? And who do we need to talk to sort of help us work through those steps? And Liam, you happened to be one of those people early on in that stage.
I did indeed. So I was very lucky to come on board. I do remember you saying, oh, we think this is going to take about 5 years. And it's so impressive that you actually projected that accurately.
I think that was very much luck more than anything, but yeah, we totally planned it.
Hey, luck or not, it still worked. So there's obviously some element of planning that went in there. Kathy, what did you do to sort of prepare for your first video game?
I'm actually a writer, and I went to this marvelous talk by Christy Diener from Brisbane, who showed how very strongly emotional video games could be. So I quit my job I'd been at for 24 years and went and studied game design for 2 years. And then it took me a year to prepare everything, scope it all out. So we didn't. So I started to do it in 2014, and I actually started making the game in 2018, and the alpha was finished in 2018. So it took a while to prepare, and then having finished it, we decided it wasn't good enough, and we had to spend another 2 years making it diverse and accessible.
Nice. I mean, those are crucially important things to realize as you're going through your project. And, you know, I'm so glad that you went through that experience, and that Frog's Princess is, you know, as accessible as it is now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jake, how did you prepare for your first game? Because I know that you obviously you've been a part of the industry for, 5 years now, I think, in various capacities. Right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I started out kind of more from the music side, and then when I decided I actually wanted to do my own games, or kind of really the idea that I had when I was like, okay, I am going to make a game now. Just like music, I just dove into it, and I was like, let's just make this thing. And I kind of managed to get some funding and a bit of support, and I scoped it fairly well. But after I'd created a demo, I kind of realized the scope was way too big. It was just not going to be what I wanted to do. And kind of, I guess, in contrast to Alicia and Kathy, I was very, very clear that I wanted to complete something within a year. And I'd seen, a lot of other developers that completed games in 4, 5, 6 years as their first release. And some of them had, moderate success, or some of them had kind of less commercial success, I'm talking about. And I thought, particularly as a songwriter and being used to creating very small things and releasing a lot of them, to me, that was just so terrifying to go, no. I can't spend 6 years of my life on something that I'm not sure whether it will have the success that I want it to have. So once I kind of figured that out, I just scoped, and I just cut and I cut and I cut until the game was set in essentially one room, within a couple of hours in the game world. So that seeing a lot of other people and having taken a bit of time to experiment really helped me prepare, and go, what can I realistically achieve in less than a year with the skills that I actually have? And really accepting that and coming to terms with that, I think, was a huge benefit. But I really had to take a strong look at myself and what I was capable of. So, getting feedback from other people about what I wanted to do as well was a huge part of it. Sitting down with producers, looking at budgets and just writing things out and just trying to draft things, or paper prototype, I guess, in a way. And that's really how I feel like I prepared for Video World.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's exactly what I think even professional people do. Like, that's when Summerfall started, that was the first thing I did, was go and just ask a bunch of people, so how the fuck do you do this? It is like, is what I'm doing kind of on the right path? Like, and often that was a very kind, no, but let me sort of take you under my wing and show you a little bit about, what is the right way to do this? And it's always incredibly useful and incredibly helpful. One of the things that sort of came up in all of your stories to some extent was expectations and expectation management. Before you shipped your game, and before you sort of went into that process, what expectations did you have for what development would be like? Like, what did you expect it would feel like, be like? Did you think that it would be shorter, longer? Kathy, do you want to start us off there?
Well, yes. I'd done design production, and so I sort of understood. And luckily, I'd made lots and lots of games in game jams, and that really set me up. I can't stress enough, make lots of little games before you make a big game. And I knew parents liked the game and children loved the game. So I worked really hard up to launch, thinking that after launch, I would just watch the sales come in. And that expectation was not met.
We'll talk about that a little bit later. But that is such a common story. And I think that like almost every game developer at some point who's done their own thing has gone through exactly that same thing of sort of having these expectations, because that's what we read about. And that's, you know, people love the game when they play it, but the reality obviously can be very, very different. Alicia, like when you and the rest of Myriad were starting to just talk through Where the Snow Settles before it was ever named that, what expectations did you have for what it would be like and sort of how it would go?
I think that's one of the tricky things, even at the start of any game, right? Is what is the vision that each person has on the team about this particular game, and does that align? What is it? What directions could it go into? So there's that planning stage. Kathy, you sort of touched on it earlier as well, that you took a long time in that planning stage, and we did too, because the hardest thing for us was to manage expectations of what the actual game is with each other, as opposed to what are our expectations on what we want out of the game. We were super clear on that. That was really easy, and that was great because it gave us constraints about what the game could be. But, you know, some of us are perfectionists. I'm definitely a perfectionist. I wanted it to be beautiful in XYZ places. Some of us are programmers, so they want to make sure that it's super componentized and then they can do it perfectly for the programming perspective as well. And then you've got scope, right? Like you have all these plans of it's going to be this and that, and we can go in this level and that level. And at the end of the day, you just got to keep scoping it back and back and back and back. So I think that was a big expectation management for us, was what is this game and how big is it? They were the hardest expectations for us to sort of manage as a team, I think.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think on all projects, that is always the hardest part of, you know, what is the reality of this game? Like when you get down to it, what is it actually going to look like? And for a lot of projects too, that doesn't get defined until, you know, midway to 3/4 of the way through. And then suddenly you're like, oh shit, like, oh no, we really have to define this. And it turns out that we've just forgotten about this element of the game, like what this screen will look like or how this interaction will work. Jake, what was your experience of sort of going into your game? Like, what did you expect from the outset of what it would be like and how that would work?
I mean, I expected it to be very challenging, and I expected that there would be things that wouldn't be able to make it into the game, or that I would have to cut things, but that didn't make it any less heartbreaking as well sometimes, when it was like, damn it, I did really expect to have this particular thing in the game, but I know that I have to cut that to meet my deadline or to be able to get it shipped at all. So I think those, yeah, really having those, had a lot of grand expectations of what the game would be, what it would feel like, and managing those was a challenge. I also, I guess I expected the development process to be challenging and hard, because that had been my experience in, you know, I'd done some game development beforehand, whether it had been a little bit of contract work or game jams or kind of the previous demo that I'd done. So something that I guess I tried to do from the outset was to try and shift my expectations from going, oh, this is going to be the best game ever, to being, this is going to be something that I can leverage to get myself another grant, to kind of prove my niche. This is something that I can expect to trial my mechanics in. This is something that I can expect to use at PAX to just start meeting people. This is something that I can expect that maybe PR, you know, like journos and stuff might be interested in, or at least open up communication lines for me. And once I kind of shifted my expectation onto what like the realistic and very physical outcomes were of the game, that reduced a lot of stress for me. And I love the game, but it didn't turn out to be what I expected it to be. So yeah, I guess that was important for me and made the whole process, the whole development process and the shipping a lot more enjoyable, was acknowledging that my expectations were, you know, maybe fairly blown out in terms of what the game is and what it can be and how it can make you feel and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Totally. It's like very freeing in some ways to just sort of be realistic with that scope, because it's, when it's in your head, obviously it's perfect. And then as soon as you put pen to paper or code to IDU, it suddenly sort of is a mess. And then, you know, something comes out of that. And I'm really glad you're proud of it. That's really,
Thanks.
really awesome. Because often that's not the case either. Like, I think a lot of people go into that and be like, oh, fuck there, you know, yes, I'm really not proud of this part or this element. So sort of what was the reality of shipping like versus your expectation of it, Jake? Like you had, you know, obviously initially it was this sort of big idealistic vision, and then you cut it down over time. So like what was the difference between like the reality of making a game and shipping a game to what your expectations were?
I think in terms of its like commercial success or its amount of sales and Steam reviews was actually fairly aligned with my expectation. What I didn't expect or what kind of really surprised me was how challenging and stressful getting like Steam builds would be, and just dealing with that platform, working out how to update stuff, how to like play test it through Steam. And I decided to also build and ship to Mac and the Mac App Store because so much, you know, I wanted to leverage this and show this to music industry, which is 99% Mac. So I was like, even if I just want to use this as a demo to send to people for free to go, hey, this is what I do, it needs to be on the Mac App Store for them to access it, or it needs to be notarized. And that process was a nightmare. Like even now, I tried to rebuild it recently for Mac for an update, and I spent hours and hours and I just couldn't do it. And so, yeah, the reality of going this whole logistical back-end thing of just dealing with having a physical game being shipped took so much more time and so much more stress and pressure than I expected. So that was the most difficult thing, and the thing that really was different to what I thought it would be. I thought it'd be like, great, I just press the upload button to the Mac App Store. No, that's not the reality.
Yeah, like signing builds for Mac is a process. At one point I worked at Fellow Traveler back when it was called Surprise Attack, and part of my job was actually doing Mac builds for one of the games we had, and it was rough back then. I can't imagine what it's like now. It's very impressive that you managed to even get that done. I gave up after a certain point. So Alicia, what about for you? Like, what was the reality of shipping Where the Snow Settles as opposed to sort of what you expected at the beginning?
I think for us, because we were 5 years into this project, shipping for us was kind of closing that book, right? So it was the end of a chapter for us. So we pressed that ship button after going through, you know, Xbox certification. We ditched Mac because we also couldn't do it. And getting those builds done, QA done, and we were just like, okay, we'll do a quick marketing campaign, press the ship button, and then if we need to do any post support, then let's do post support. But for us, it was a completion thing. So I think as a team, we're such a close-knit team. So we had a little launch party, and people that supported us along the way came along. So for us, it was a beautiful end to a very long and tough and really interesting learning experience. And we weren't really keeping an eye on sales or anything like that, because that didn't align with the goals that we were going for. So I think for us, release matched our expectations in that we can sort of enjoy what we've done and appreciate what we've done, and then just rest for a while and see what comes next. So yeah, I think we're very lucky in that it did match our expectations in that sense. Yeah.
Can I just piggyback off that a little bit? What you said about like kind of closing a chapter, it being the end of the book or whatever, that's very, very real. And I certainly experienced that. And something I didn't expect that's been really positive is for people 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months down the track to play the game and then to get feedback from that and be like, oh, this thing that I created is still valuable. It's not just exciting for a couple of weeks. It's there and people might still discover it. And that was a really positive thing that I didn't expect happen.
Totally. Like, it's so lovely when anyone plays something that you've made, and then if they say something positive about it, it's even better. So what were some of
Wait.
the... Yes, go, please.
I made a list.
Excellent.
Anyone that knows me would know that I really care about indies knowing what to do. So just remember that some people get so involved in making a game that they don't sort out their legal entity. And they say, oh, yes, we're a partnership. Well, you need to get a tax file number for that group. And in doing so, you're probably sorting out your IP at that time and deciding your share. But you also need to decide what you're going to do with the US, whether you're going to get an ITIN or a EIN. In other words, how are you going to handle your tax? If you don't get an ITIN, and I didn't, which is a mistake, then you can't get your 30% withholding tax back. And so it's worthwhile, and people don't because it takes weeks. So you can't suddenly say, oh, we're going to launch now, next week. You need to set up your legal stuff beforehand. When you do go with a game store, they'll get you to get a DUNS number, which is basically a US firm that checks your ABN is valid. So obviously just get all those things organised beforehand when you're not under the crunch of making everything perfect before the launch day. And they will ask you to register a bank account, of course, and there's a small form about exporting IP from America. I just put yes, I can't remember. So having sorted all that out, of course, then you need to physically port to the various places. And I spent most of September 20 trying to port it to the Mac. And I was really sad because a lot of my target audience used old Macs. And people say, oh, don't worry about it because your iOS game is going to be playable on new Macs. Well, that's true, but not on old Macs.
Not the old ones, yeah.
So prepare time, just allow time. So don't tell your friends you're going to be launching next week if you have never ported before. And of course, make sure you go through the test route with Android and Apple because you can. And how foolish would you feel if you launched and there was a bug that would have been so easily found? With Steam, you can test your executable separately, but it shows you the megabytes that have changed when you upload to Steam. And that way, if, for example, in my case, I won't accidentally download a demo on top of the main because you can tell the size. And finally, when you release, Apple won't release on a date. You think, why won't Apple work? I mean, there's so many times you say, why won't Apple work? And one of them is that you're trying to get Apple to release it automatically, and you won't. You've got to do the manual release. And you do get these misleading emails from both Android, Google Play and Apple saying, oh, it's ready for release, but you've actually got to physically go in and tick the box to make it release. So there's my list for you.
That's an important list. And if you want to hear more about setting up your initial studio and indie finances and business, etc., stay tuned after this panel because Kathy's talk is directly after this panel in this track. And it is hilarious and well worth a listen.
Liam, can I just back off what you mentioned?
Please, yes.
I think when people think of this idea of release, like it's just ooh, press the button, done. But there's so much preparation that you've got to do in place of that, like per platform preparation, read through all their requirements. Some of them have automatic releases, some do manual ones. You need to get all your legal and financial issues in order, and you've got to get classification sorted, and then are you doing marketing campaigns to go with that? There's so many different streams that are so different from the finishing development of a game. You really want to make sure you give enough time to prepare for those because they can definitely sneak up on you, and some of them require you to be really prepared and give a date in advance, and others don't. So if you want to try and align all your platforms, you're going to have to do some juggling, which is quite tricky.
Yeah, CERT in particular is one thing that, like, if you want to go to a console or Switch or something like that, you absolutely need to do your research and speak to other people who've shipped on those platforms to get a realistic idea of the amount of work and time involved. Because CERT can take, depending on the platform, anywhere from 4 weeks to 3 months. And you may be going back and forth for some time because some of the requirements for some platforms are esoteric at best, and truly don't make any sense, but you have to do them. It's even the same for shipping on Mac and iOS. Sometimes there are some specific things that you will need to do that you wouldn't expect, and just making sure that you understand that ahead of time, you need to plan that in is crucially important. What were some of the things that you found challenging that you didn't expect to find challenging? Jake, do you want to field that one first?
Sure. I mean, I don't know. Aside from like those kind of logistics that we spoke about, I mean, the most challenging parts, are those moments where you're in the development of a game, particularly, I guess, as a solo developer, going, is this good? Is this terrible? Should I just like scrap it and start again? And being able to overcome that, really is the most challenging thing. And like I kind of said earlier, having to make decisions about scope, going, this feature, it's too late. It just needs to be cut. And 9 times out of 10, the game is actually better off without it anyway. But having to make those decisions and knowing what the right decision is, especially when you don't have a team to discuss it with, I think those are the really, really challenging moments, at least for me.
Absolutely. Extremely same experience on my part. Everything that I've worked on, even with a team, it's often like, is this good? Because you don't know. And I mean, Alicia, what was your experience like working with Myriad with that? Like, what were your struggles that you didn't expect?
Yeah, no, exactly the same. It's how do we make decisions on where to go with this thing? So, I mean, you've got different department considerations. So the programmer will have one priority from another. So we use the idea of core pillars or some sort of criteria to help us make those decisions, and having that criteria really helped have those conversations. If we didn't have that, like we had in the early stages, we were just going around and not really making that great progress, because we'd want to try one thing and another thing, and what if we did this and that, and it just kind of goes around. So having some clear way of saying, do we go or no go on this thing, really, really helped us, because yeah, huge challenge. Making decisions is hard.
It really is. I think a lot of people don't appreciate how hard decision making is, particularly as it pertains to scope and features. Like, it is incredibly hard to kill things that you care about. It's so difficult. And until you actually get to that point where you're like, hey, like this was a key part of my emotional experience when I thought through this game, and I have to like just cull it. It's gutting. Kathy, what were some of the things that you didn't expect to struggle with that you ended up really struggling with?
Are we talking shipping or making?
Both.
Well, when it came to shipping, I had the most awful experience, because we spent a lot of time on QA, and I had 3 people doing QA. I was so proud of the quality of the gameplay, and I was the one who tested the blind accessibility on PC, and that was the part that broke.
Oh no!
I put out a game, and because I was testing it on the game engine without realizing, instead of on the executable, what an idiot! And so we put it all out there, and the first thing that happens, this guy comes and says it doesn't work. I'm like, what? And there was a huge bug. It took us till about April to fix it.
Oh, rough.
Oh, can I piggyback on that,
Yeah.
Kathy? Like, you just can't understate the importance of QA. Like, it just mitigates so much effort in the future if you tackle it early, test early, keep going, moving forward. Like, luckily, we have a QA specialist and expert on our team, so we could follow a QA first process, but that saved our butt so much. And yeah, even getting through cert, like, read that documentation, question where those gaps are, and use QA to your advantage to get through it, because, oh boy, QA, invaluable.
It just saves your ass so many times. And then, but there's always something that gets through, and you gotta roll with the punches there. As shitty as that can be, people also just really appreciate when they're like, hey, I had this problem with your game, and you're like, oh shit, I'm sorry, here, let me solve that for you. Like it is a lovely experience as a player of being heard, because it doesn't happen very often. And
Although they were very nice about it.
good. we love a good, nice player who's polite about the issues. What were some of the parts of the process that you really enjoyed the most, Alicia? Like when you were sort of going through that development process and through ship, like what were the things that you loved?
Honestly, for me, it was the team that I loved the most. Like we would get together every second Wednesday and go through sprint planning and go through retro and a showcase. And we were so lucky to have set up such a safe space to have vulnerable conversations. And I think that just grew us together as such a close-knit team. So this very much became a social and very friendship-based project for all of us, I think. And for me, that was the most beautiful part. We could learn with each other, we can grow with each other, and we can fail with each other and support each other through that process too. So that was beautiful for me.
That's so nice. That's like the ultimate dream, really, of making something with people that you care about, and just having that experience, for a lot of people is like what video games is. On a very different side of that spectrum, Jake, like what were the parts that you really enjoyed, that you just loved about making the game?
Pretty much all of it, but
that's great.
Yeah. But the real core of it was absolutely the collaboration. So the video world I made primarily by myself, as in I guess the most amount of hours. But the time that I spent with the concept artist and 3D artist, and the QA and the music collaborations that I did, like those were the things that brought me so much excitement and joy. And especially when it shipped, I was excited about it, but I was so excited for them as well to be like, hey, look, the thing that you worked on is out. I'm so proud of all of you. So that was such a joy for me. That was one of the best parts about doing it. Also, I mean, at the end, even though I was excited about shipping it, seeing the vision come together in this final product, just creatively, was so satisfying. And I remember I had this kind of really lovely moment when I just kind of did one of the final play tests myself and thought, I don't even need to ship this. I'm just so excited to make the next thing. Like, this has brought me all the joy and satisfaction I need. And projects that I'd worked on previously, I'd been so focused on the outcome and what people would think, which is still important. But this one, it'd been much more focused on the inner satisfaction and the creativity. And that made just the finishing of it actually really joyful.
That's lovely.
Yeah, I have to agree. The thing I found best was the launch party, because some people hadn't worked on it for 2 years by the time it finished. And so it was just so rewarding. And so I actually spent the first 2 months when I was supposed to be marketing, I was actually making videos from the launch party and adding little animations to them. So everyone had their own piece of launch party video. So because it was such a thrill. Yeah.
I love that. That's beautiful.
That's great. It's so, like, it is important to mark those milestones too, because I think like some of those experiences can be very ephemeral and kind of like they're lovely memories, but to have a piece of that's such a lovely idea. To sort of like start wrapping things up, I've got two final questions I want to get through. So what was the emotional journey of working on your various games, and what surprised you about that emotional journey? Kathy, do you want to start there?
What surprised me was the relief to have a finished game, partly because we'd planned to spend a year on it. We made it in a year, but then we spent an extra 2 years on the features, which, you know, is the trap that everyone tells you not to do. So we did it. And so it was a huge relief to feel that we'd made the game we wanted to make. And the emotional, I just hadn't expected the joy of watching strangers play the game, getting a really nice review. And then I hadn't expected moving on. I hadn't actually seen what it was like on the other side of the game. There's a whole world out here.
it's definitely like it's a thing you don't think about. I think everyone's so focused on shipping as like this, like the be all and end all. Alicia, what was your experience of the emotional journey?
Oh, so let me try and sum it up in 5 years worth of dev. I guess you have that bit at the start and you're like, oh, this is so exciting. We have so many things to learn and we can do so many things and we can collaborate with all these people. So there's a lot of excitement at the start. And then when you get to that point where you have to make hard decisions, that's when it gets more challenging, right? So you start feeling a bit of worry, you start feeling self-doubt and doubt as a team, or you question things a lot. And then you've got to work on building that up so you can make it through to the next stage. So there's a lot of reinforcement and encouragement that we focused on a lot to keep us going through those hard stages where we were doubting ourselves a lot of the time along the way. A lot of support from those people around us to help get through those stages too. So I think it definitely goes up and down a lot. And I do agree with you, Kathy, like there's that relief and what comes after. It just, I've heard stories from a lot of people, yeah, shipping is that pivotal point, and then what? What happens after that? Do people want to sort of hold on to it a bit longer and do some post support, or do they just want to wash their hands clean of it? And I think it's different amongst different members of the team for us too. So, you know, some of us want to hold on to things, some of us don't. How do we manage that? So that's been an interesting thing too. But I think, yeah, the relief at the end is fantastic. I think in a 5-person team, we were very close knit. So we're all very in tune with each other's emotional fluctuations along the way. And they were obviously never aligned with each other, right? Some of us might have a really good sprint, whilst others might have a really low one. So that actually is a good thing, because we could help those that have the energy and the spoons to spend can then pick those other people up along the way. So that definitely helped sort of make our peaks and troughs a bit less extreme. But I'm definitely not going to hide behind the fact that there were definitely tough times and we were tired and exhausted and we just wanted to get through it. And then other times we were elated because we'd have that aha moment where you hear this beautiful sound come into this scene and it all works together, and then you want to do everything at once in that 1 week. So yeah, managing those peaks and troughs is, it's definitely a high and low emotional journey to go through that. Yeah, so I think you get a bit of everything.
You really do. It really is a full character arc that you go on. Jake, what was your experience of like the emotional journey?
Yeah, absolutely. A character art, and I think you learn a lot about yourself. I know that I did, and I've already spoken about how, you know, to begin with, I was a bit, I don't know, I had been focused more on outcomes, and then I kind of focused more on creativity. But then focusing on creativity still has those peaks and troughs about whether it's terrible or good, and you kind of starts exciting and then it dips quite low and then it'll get super exciting, go up and down, up and down. At the end, I was very, very joyful and so proud of it. But absolutely, I still felt, you know, I think like all artists and creatives and people that are putting themselves out in the world and being vulnerable, you want your thing to be like somehow like spark something and become something that everyone's writing about and talking about, and the next big thing. And you can rationalize it in your brain and know exactly what your thing is and where it fits. But I think it's silly to pretend that we all don't have an ego. And so there was still, you know, moments of disappointment after the fact when it was released. It was like, this is great and I love it. I'm still excited about it. It still wasn't the thing that was going to take my career to the next level in a big step. It was just a couple of small steps. And so just reflecting on that and coming to terms with it, you know, happened fairly naturally and easily. And I think most people are pretty good with that. But to acknowledge that and go, yeah, it's okay to accept that you have an ego and you want things. You're allowed to want those things. You don't have to be ashamed of that. I guess I want to share that that's okay. Feel that. Let yourself go through that.
100%. I think that people's experience of shipping can wildly differ, but one thing that seems to remain true to everyone is that shipping tends to be a release and a relief, and at the same time is often this moment of reckoning. Like it's a bit disappointing, and you don't expect to feel that way necessarily. Like I think a lot of people expect release to just feel good. And it doesn't. Like it's mostly good a lot of the time, but it's always a bit bittersweet. And that's okay. Like that's a normal human reaction to finally putting something out into the world.
Yeah, and I think like pretty much everything, the journey, as cliche as it sounds, is the best part of it.
Yeah.
Releasing it and finishing it was very satisfying, but the real joy comes from actually making it, and focusing on making that process enjoyable, I think, will lead to more satisfaction. If you're someone that's shipping your first game, focus on enjoying the process of the development rather than what the release might mean.
Absolutely. And sort of to wrap things around, what is there any advice that you would give people? Any last words of wisdom that we haven't covered? Yes, Kathy, please. I know I'm sure you have a list, so please take us through the list.
I did write down the value of game jams, in that the more games, small games you make with no expectation of quality or even finishing, but enough to give you experience in every aspect of working with people under pressure, and the physical aspects of getting the art done, getting the art named, getting it in there, animating it, adding the voices and the sounds, like all of those things you need to be able to do. Even if you're not the expert, you need to be able to do all those things so that you can then make a game in a group. And I honestly think that making lots and lots of little games is the way to get inspiration for making the best game as well.
Absolutely. Jake, what are your last, what are you going to leave us with here?
Sure. I mean, really, I would just reiterate that if you can focus on like real, I guess, goals, or what you can leverage from creating and shipping your first game, if that's your focus, I think you will get a lot more satisfaction and more from it, because when you're building the game, it's, almost like design pillars. You're going, well, what's the goal of this game? Is the goal for me to have something that I'm really proud of, or is it to have something that I think will sell lots of copies? What's more important at this point in my life? And making those decisions, I guess, early, and knowing why you're doing it, I think will help you be able to make decisions. It will be a more enjoyable process. You'll be able to move on to the next thing much easier, and maybe you'll even have a better product as well, because it will be much more defined what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Alicia, what are your words of wisdom?
I was going to say exactly the same thing, the why. Know the why. And keep revisiting that, because especially if you're part-time, that's going to change, right? Especially if you've got a team of more than one, you want to make sure that why is aligning for everyone, because if you don't have alignment or some sort of goal to work towards together, then you're going to end up with conflict, and that's just going to make things plummet quickly, and no one's going to have a good time. But also know when to identify if it isn't worth going through to the end as well. Don't be scared that you've wasted all this time trying something and you don't actually get to shipping. Like, a lot of projects don't get to ship, so it's worth figuring out, okay, why are we doing this? Does that equal ship? Then sure, let's work towards ship. But if not, just focus on why you're doing it, because 100% important to get that alignment on the team.
It can change your whole experience.
Yeah.
For better or for worse. So I would 100% agree. Thank you all so much for taking the time to do this. I hope it has been valuable to everyone watching. I hope you have a lovely time with the rest of GCAP. And thank you all so much.